grew up on Dell Avenue some 50 years ago to Mary and Tony Pirro, the youngest of 6. Had a paper route growing up. I worked from the very beginning. Spent more time than I know at Ocean Beach Park as a kid. I went on to New London Public Schools, then on to St. Bernard's. Throughout my course of being a student, I struggled. I had dyslexia, I had issues in school that I didn't always understand until I had a child, thank you Dan, who had a learning disability as well. So one of my focus in my campaign is to look at 504 plans and to try and address how we're looking at that. My other issue for running is some of the disturbing things that have happened in our school district. And I think we've lacked the leadership to address some of those issues. I'm currently an investigator with the state of Connecticut. I served previously on the city council for 16 years, served a term as your mayor. I'm also one of the registrar of voters responsible for over $120,000 budget that we oversee. So some of the things I want to look at in the school system are Harbor School and whether or not that school building is viable for our students moving forward. I want to understand why we haven't signed a contract with paraprofessionals for over the last 2 years. They voted for a contract. There still is no contract in place. I talked about it. Thank you.
Is that okay?
Sure. The way I understood you to be policy, we're a policy board. So when you say policy, I'm talking, they should be bringing initiatives to the board. So that's the way I envisioned the question. So,
correct.
So my understanding in looking at the board is that I don't see anything that's brought to the board from an individual board member. What I see is a dysfunctional organizational chart. The board meets as 3 members to put together an agenda. I think that's inadequate. When I served on the city council, if you wanted to bring a policy initiative, you write out the initiative or the policy you want, and if it has to go to committee for further review, you do it. The way the board's set up right now, the 3 members on this committee can squash any policy discussion. It doesn't make any sense. So that would be the first thing. I'd get together the other 7 members, if I was one of them, and say, hey, this is what we have to do. We have to change the structure of the board and the way we put things on the agenda. The other thing I would do is, from a budgeting standpoint, I'd start at a zero-based budgeting. Nobody can understand this budget that's out there. I'm sorry, it does not make any sense. I was the chair of the finance on the council for 10 years. I understand budgets. It makes no sense. You can't attach what goes with what.
Okay, time. Sorry. Those silent llamas are.
Can you repeat that? Because I was a little
background.
confusing. Even your wife's shaking her head. She's reading.
All right.
But I'll try and answer it this way. And I think Elaine was right on the money in terms of we set policy. The board sets policy. I'm not a we part yet, but I hope to be. The board sets policy. The only employee of the board is the superintendent, the organizational chart. You have to evaluate that superintendent. I believe they just did. But you should be giving them a follow-up every 3 months. You should be checking in. There should be goals during the year. And obviously the goals that we should be addressing, one of those would be personnel, and are we evaluating them? And how are we evaluating them? And that we hold that person accountable. I know that's not been something that we've been doing, but we hold that person accountable. The only employee that we have is the superintendent. We can't hire and fire teachers. Okay, there is a negotiated process. There's a union contract. The superintendent is responsible to the board. We have to make sure we communicate our goals to that person, and that our top priorities are this issue of a lack of accountability in the personnel aspect.
Okay, thank you. All right, exercising one of his 30 seconds.
Okay, I thought it was a minute. Hold on, the light's on.
Okay.
So I think it really gets down to zero-based budgeting, okay? You start at 0 and you have the department heads come in and basically tell you why they need this money, okay? So it's basically a purpose and a desired outcome. When I was on the city council and I was the mayor, the city manager wanted a risk manager. say, okay, what is the purpose of this? What is the desired outcome? We're gonna save money because we're gonna look at our workers' comp, and we saved money on that. The police chief at the time wanted a deputy chief. We told her, you're gonna have to pay for it in your own budget. Well, what is the desired outcome? And she saved over $500,000 in her budget. The Board of Ed has control through a budgetary process, right, for desired outcomes. And it's through the budgetary process. And to get back at what happened in our school system, you had 4 different principals at the middle school. Nobody knew who was in charge. That was the problem. And we weren't holding those individuals accountable. And it was through the budgetary process that the board approved. We have to know our roles, okay?
And that's both of your 30 seconds.
Yeah, I think that when I left the city council, that we were doing this. We were going down the road, and I believe Mayor Pastro was sat with the board to try and pick a finance director, and they came up with Rob Funk, and I guess they parted ways at that point. But we were moving down the road. Governor Lamont has basically said at an education seminar that he wanted back of the house, that he wants boards of eds and city council to look at the back of the house. Finance, IT. We have to look at infrastructure. Mayor Pastro was looking at infrastructure. He wants to look at trying to get rid of some of the buildings. Maybe we can jointly share office spacing. There's no meeting of the minds. The mayor and the superintendent, if I was on the board, I'd direct the superintendent to meet with the mayor monthly on initiatives that we give her. And then I would meet with the city council quarterly because they hold the purse strings. So I think we have to have an understanding of where we're headed. I would personally want an agreement so nobody would have more power over this position. Thank you. The issues, if you look at some of, and I've stayed up late looking at some of the meetings that are online that you can go look at. Some of them are very contentious. I think you got to tell the superintendent, these are our goals. This is what I want to achieve. You know, to me, it would be zero-based budgeting. It would be infrastructure. It would be, hey, we have a 2014 vote by the citizens of this community to make improvements to the high school and the middle school, and there's no shovel in the ground. That's one of your main priorities. We have paraprofessionals who voted to get in a union 2 years ago, and still today there is no agreement. That's a problem. Those are the things that you give goals and objectives. You let the superintendent know where you're coming from. The problem has been, from what I see, is the superintendent is doing policy and she's doing administration. You can't have that person doing both roles. So from my perspective, I work with the city manager. You know, I did go out and talk with that person and have a good relationship, but I also knew there was a dividing line. We can't be best buddies if I want to challenge that person. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob.
Well, thank you to the Neighborhood Alliance, the Vidals, our timekeepers, and all of you for coming out. I want your vote because I think I have the experience to go to the board meetings and bring policy initiatives. I believe the structure that's there currently is a broken structure. It does not provide for each individual board member to bring a policy initiative to the board and have an understanding. Some of the things that I'm looking to do right at the outset, obviously I mentioned the paraprofessionals, they've been without a contract for 2 years, something that shouldn't be happening. Harbor School needs to be addressed. There are 300 kids at that school. There's not a direction long-term for that school. That school is in, it's given us a lot of good years, but I don't think there's a vision there and a direction there. So for me, it's about policy, it's about accountability, transparency, and building goals. I don't want to be the superintendent's friend. I want to challenge her to be the best that she can be, but also being a board member that gives that position the policy direction that we're supposed to be. The board is policy, the superintendent is an administrator. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron.